That's something that's protected. So again, thank you so much. Welcome everybody for this lecture for Native American Heritage Month at UCSF, titled American Indian Heritage After 500 Years. What happened? What's missing? How can we take care of home? And today's lecture is by Dr. Dale Walker, who you'll hear from in a moment. But before that, just really wanted to give honor and gratitude to the Native American Heritage Month Planning Committee. Again, this committee is comprised of learners and staff who really commit their time and their leadership in curating these offerings like this one tonight, just for our collective learning here at UCSF. So I wanted to name the Association of Native American Medical Students, also known as ANAMS, the Native American Health Alliance, NAHA, which is the staff organization here at UCSF, and then the Multicultural Resource Center, part of the Office of Diversity and Outreach. So just wanted to, again, have some Zoom protocol, just gentle reminders for ourselves, just to ensure that this is an enjoyable experience for all attendees. Just to please be mindful and respectful of the chat. Live captioning is available. Please have sound on mute. And then if there's any questions that emerge, curiosities, wonderings during this lecture, you can directly chat Dixie, or you can put it in the chat in general so folks can see it. And again, just a kind reminder that we will be recording this session and we'll make this available to you all within a few days. So we're going to start with the land acknowledgement of UCSF, and I just really want to uplift really the leadership of Dr. Tassi Bongiovanni, Dr. Ann Montgomery, the Native American Health Alliance, as well as the Association of Native American Medical Students at UCSF, who really partnered and really organized to collaborate with Ramaytush Ohlone community to be able to offer this land acknowledgement at UCSF during summer 2020. So with that said, also just wanted to name, right, that the UC system is based on the UC land grants, the land grab institution. So, you know, we have this privilege of, you know, studying, working at the UC, and we benefit, you know, from being on these unceded lands. So we would like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people who are traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, the land that UCSF sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue the tradition of coming together and growing as a community, and we thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship, mutual respect and understanding. So I just really wanted to elevate, you know, that the Indigenous community here at UCSF really came together to curate this page with resources. And I think a large part of land acknowledgement is also reflecting really like what's our purpose and taking action and what do we do next, which is kind of tied to this theme, you know, of this lecture that we're going to be part of today. So just really uplifting these particular kind of next steps and ways to get involved, and just encourage everybody to go onto the website and look at the wonderful resources to help you all prepare to be able to lead land acknowledgements and take action and just really support rematriation efforts locally, you know, where you're situated in, but also globally as well. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Nikki Apana, who's going to be introducing our speaker.
Aloha kako. My name is Nikki Kalani Apana. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a first-year medical student at UCSF. I will be introducing Dr. R. Dale Walker, who we're so very lucky to have with us today. Dr. Walker is Emeritus Professor and past Chair of Psychiatry at the Oregon Health and Science University. He is Director of the One Sky Center, a National Resource Center for American Indian Health, Education, and Research. This center provides expert consultation, training, and technical assistance that facilitate strategic planning and leadership development for optimal health service delivery for tribes and Native communities across North America. It also provides program evaluation and dissemination of evidence-based culturally appropriate best practices. Dr. Walker, who grew up in a rural area near Claremore, Oklahoma, is Cherokee. He is a 1972 graduate of the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine with residency training in psychiatry at the University of California School of Medicine in San Diego. He was on the faculty in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Washington in Seattle from 1977 until 1996, when he came to the Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. He has served as professor in both the Department of Psychiatry and the Department of Preventive Medicine and Public Health since that time. Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Walker. We're so lucky to have you.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate that introduction. I appreciate actually the invitation to be here. I'm excited to be with you, and I'm also excited to be able to talk about the issues that we have today and to think a little bit about what you all are doing down there. I'm very impressed. I've always been impressed with the programs, the Native programs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's very good to be here. I think I'm going to jump right into this talk as soon as I can find my share screen and get things moving. There we go. I'll hit share, and then I will there we go. So we're going to have some fun today. We're talking about ugly things. We're talking about painful things. But by gollies, after the election yesterday, my head is kind of spinning still. And I'm going to try to be kind of having fun today and enjoy Native heritage. It's really American Indian Alaska Native heritage after 500 years. We want to talk about what's happened, what's missing, and how can we take care of home. I always I grew up in a rural background, and I do a lot of work across Indian country on reservations, and taking care of home is the theme for me. And I hope you all will enjoy this lecture. As I say, we're going to be talking about lots of things, but the first thing is Native Heritage Month. We're going to celebrate that. I'm going to ask you all to think about what you can do to celebrate yourselves. But indeed, hey, let's have some fireworks and let the party begin. All right. Well, I wanted to give you, I loved the recommendations, Melissa, that you gave about what can you do. Sometimes, that you feel so helpless. You hear the great problems and you want to know, what can you really do? And I gave 8 suggestions that might help you. Those of you that aren't Native, you might be able to start looking at things you can do. Christmas is coming, support the Native artists and craft makers. All you need to do is Google, and they're right there in your neighborhood. And, take advantage of that and begin to understand, make a purchase and ask them what it means. And I think that's always a helpful thing to do. Reading books and watching documentaries, in a way, I qualify for that today. I'm going to give you something. My theme is know the history. And I always believe that's a part of what medicine needs to do whenever we see a new person coming into our bailiwick as a patient. Well, we're going to read blogs, forums, learn to play traditional instruments if that's your inclination. It's not hard to learn about rattles and flutes and drums. I don't know about you, but drums, when I take a drum into the woods and I'm alone there with nature and I can make the sound of music, it's really just an eye-opening experience for me. We can learn about traditional gardening. You've got powwows all over your area. If you haven't gone to a powwow, go to a powwow. They're fun, they're open, and people want you to be there. You can look at causes and donate to charities. You can also learn American Indian recipes. There's some wonderful recipes that you can enjoy in the process. And if you email me, I'll give you a series of those things. Okay, well, let's talk about the goals today. That's what it's all about. Some of you have been on the part of my lecture that I gave a little bit earlier at UCSF, and the goals are the same, but I've changed things around a bit for you in the talk. We're going to discuss the doctrine of discovery and the resulting pre- and post-colonial events that have led to multi-generational trauma. We're going to look at what American Indians and Alaska Natives were like pre-contact and what did they contribute over time. We're going to discuss American Indian Alaska Native demographics with a special focus on California. And we'll explore health problems in Native country. We'll ask how can we improve on those issues. And finally, we'll discuss strategies towards a broader understanding of Native health and rapprochement with Native people in this country. Well, let's get right to it and talk about the pre- and post-colonial events. For that, we need to do a little bit of a setting of the scene. And to me, the best way to look at what happened and why did Europeans arrive here in North and South America the way they did? You might also say, why did they end in Africa the way that they did? Because it's the same driving force. Well, Emperor Constantine in 312 legalized Christianity, and he brought together a marriage of church and state in Europe. Catholic, meaning universal, was an effort to unite all European kingdoms with the Pope. Now, the Silk Road, which started out about 130 BCE and ended in 1453 CE, was vital for knowledge transfer and spices and trade between Europe and Asia. That was a very positive relationship. Science was being lost in Europe in the Middle Ages, and it wasn't until the connection with the Arabs and with the Asians did they begin to understand more and more about science and healthcare, for that matter. The fall of the Silk Road and the rise of the Ottoman Empire in 1453 cut off trade to Asia. That was an upsetting process. Constantinople fell. There was no longer connections with Asia. And so the European countries, especially those that had a seafaring industry, were encouraged to go to sea and find a route to Europe, from Europe to Asia. And that whole thing focused on the mindset of exploration for wealth, expansion, control, glory, and religion. And I wanted to share those papal bulls because that's the doctrine of discovery. 3 papal bulls in the 15th century justified religious and legal grounds to seize and occupy foreign lands. This set in play a catastrophic change of events for indigenous people, all in the name of European empire expansion and religious righteousness. It authorized Christian monarchies to claim lands not only occupied by Christians, not already occupied by Christians, and to vanquish and place into perpetual slavery and servitude heathens, pagans, and other non-Christian people. The first 2 of those papal bulls came out in 1452 and 1455. Pope Nicholas V did those, and there were papal bulls authorizing enslavement of non-Christians and giving land claims to Portugal. Portugal, remember, was finding their way around Africa. This was the birth of the African slave trade. Now, in 1493, the last papal bull was by Pope Alexander VI. It came 3 months after Columbus got back from Spain. Now remember, Pope Alexander VI is Spanish. His last name is Borgia. He is of the Borgia family. He is known as the most corrupt pope in the history of the Catholic religion. And he was responding directly to the discoveries for Spain. And he set about developing a papal bull that asserted the rights to colonize, convert, enslave, and kill to Spain and ultimately to all Christian monarchies in Europe. If you want to read a little bit more about Borgia, his daughter is Lucretia Borgia. It's kind of interesting to read about these popes. I've gotten this information by going and finding out and translating the material from the Latin that they were written in. I wanted to talk about George Washington a little bit. This is something I didn't do in my previous lecture, and I thought that I should bring it up. George Washington had a very interesting history with Indian people in North America. His grandfather also was an outrageous slaughterer of Indian communities. George Washington got the name Conotacarius from the Seneca tribe, and that means town destroyer and devourer of villages. George Washington knew what the translation was, and he was so proud of it, he made a nameplate of Conotacarius for his office when he was president. Now, there's a book, The Indian World of George Washington by Colin Calloway of 2018 that I'd refer you to. It's really an excellent way of looking at how things happen. But the summation, my little summation of the book is American Indian policy by Washington was expansion with honor. Beautiful politics, even in those days. But it meant that he wanted to do low key. He didn't want to be disrupting things, and he would do it by treaty and by purchase. Now, the interesting thing is that's what made tribal reservations sovereign nations, because he made treaties with Indian tribes inside the United States. That's never been done anywhere else, that you actually would form foreign treaties with your interior country. But he did it that way. And if it didn't work, by the way, if the treaty didn't work, war was okay. That was the next step. For the first 4 years in his presidency, the highest budget item in the budget of this country was war on Indian people. He had an interesting statement that he viewed the West in North America as colonial space temporarily inhabited by Indian people. It goes on that way, folks. The doctrine transfers from European monarchies to our federal government. I quickly mentioned the driving force from the English part was 1496, when King Henry VII issued a royal charter to John Cabot to claim land on behalf of England occupied by heathens and infidels. This doctrine gave Christian governments in Europe the moral and legal rights to invade and seize indigenous lands and dominate indigenous people. Thomas Jefferson used the doctrine when he purchased Louisiana. The Supreme Court validated that process in 1823, when John Marshall stated that only the discovering nation, England, or the successor nation, the United States, can take possession of land from natives by conquest or purchase. They made the decision what it would be. As you can tell, that's how things evolved across the United States. Lands were gained, and the original 13 colonies knew they were headed west. They knew they wanted to go to the Pacific. I would mention to you, by the way, that I've forgotten his first name, Berkeley, Sir Berkeley from England, he had a great library in England, and he said in the 1700s that he wanted to give it to the first university that reached the Pacific coast. And that, by the way, is UC Berkeley. They have the library from Sir Berkeley that got there. So it is clear what everybody was planning back in those days. The interesting thing is, while these annexations and purchases and cessions were happening, there were Indian people in all of these areas, but they weren't a part of the discussion. Remember, we went by war, by treaty, or by overpowering, by whatever method, to gradually move the scale across to the Pacific. And that's the way that things happened in the country. It was always interesting to me that the people on the coast and all the way across the coast always viewed Indians as less than human. And that validated their ability to be so barbarous in their process. Well, I put this slide in for historical trauma because I always had trouble understanding historical trauma. And now I don't. If I look at the history, I can understand what has happened over time with the genocide and the ethnocidal intent that was given to Indian people over this time period. Well, you know, what can we do to lessen the impact of the doctrine of discovery? One issue is reconciliation. That's about establishing and maintaining a mutually respectful relationship between native and non-native people in this country. In order for that to happen, though, you have to have an awareness of the past and an acknowledgement that harm has been inflicted. Now, I will guarantee you, if I go to everybody who was elected or not elected last night in these contests, they wouldn't understand the doctrine of discovery. They wouldn't understand the harms that have been created, and they certainly will not atone for what happened. And so we have a lot to do. Euro-American people don't understand how this happened because history books don't teach it, and most assuredly, the movies didn't. And so we have this remarkable struggle because people don't know who we are. And honestly, a lot of Indians don't know who we are either. And that's a part of our problem I'll mention too in a little bit. Well, the overarching theme, another word that I like, is rapprochement. And rapprochement of cultures has been something that UNESCO came out with in 2013, where they promoted a mutual understanding and reciprocal knowledge of cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity, as well as supporting reconciliation efforts, building a framework for commonly shared values which fosters social cohesion, and disseminating the principles and tools of intercultural dialogue through quality education in the media. Finally, fostering dialogue for sustainable development and its ethical, social, and cultural dimensions. I would suggest that your three organizations that are here tonight might want to look at what rapprochement is and try to actionalize that in what you do with your organization there at the university. Well, let's talk about American Indians and what they were like in the first contact and what they contributed. I like to show this slide. It's a slide of the village of Secaucus, Carolina. Remember, there was only one Carolina. And in Secaucus, John White did the drawings and Theodore DeBray did the coloring in 1585. And these are the observations that Europeans had. They were impressed. Remember, the Europeans were coming out of the Black Death, the plague and wars and famine. And they came over to the United States and, if you will, North America, and they saw native people who were living longer than they were, who were healthier, had better food diet, and had more stable situations. They landed, you know, in the southeastern part of the U.S. where farming was already in place. That's a drawing of the village of Secaucus, and it's really remarkable. It shows the garden, it shows the forest industry, it shows how the village is organized. There's a beekeeping area up on top there, and there's the three corn, squash, and beans being grown there in one part of the garden. So it's interesting that the initial view was very positive, but because of what happened next with the disease, things deteriorated rapidly. But I wanted to share, in fact, across this country, tribes always have had organized communities. Even the hunter-gatherer societies, which the Ohlone are a part of that, the Ohlone and the Manhattan and the Nootka were hunter-gatherer societies that also had some very primitive farming involved. And so they kept their villages in place. They didn't move around like the Crow and the Huron. The Caddo were farmers in Oklahoma. And so you can see a little bit, and it's really too bad that when the Europeans came here, their attitude was so controlling and demanding. There was beautiful knowledge that was lost because of the way that they came across. I wanted to share with you a reading that I think is so important for medical students to hear about. And this is by Thomas Harriot in 1588. He was writing the book, A Brief and True Report of the Newfoundland of Virginia. There was no town where we had any device practiced against us, we leaving the inhabitants unpunished and unrevenged, because we sought by all means possible to win them by gentleness, but that within a few days after our departure from every such town, the people began to die very fast, and many in short space. In some towns about 20, some 40, some 60, and in one 60, which in truth was very many in respect to their numbers. This happened in no place that we could learn, but where we had been, and after such time. The disease also so strange that neither they knew what it was, nor how to cure it, the like by report of the oldest men in the country, never happened before, a thing especially observed by us, also by the natural inhabitants themselves. So you can see the very early descriptions of the disease and the plague that was brought about by these people who would stay a while and move on. And interesting that they have that actually written in their report. I wanted to share another written report, and this is by John Heckenwelder. It's about 200 years later than the last report, but he was doing his work on the history, manners, and customs of the Indian nations of Pennsylvania. Indian physicians are perhaps more free from fanciful theories than those of any other nations on earth. Their science is entirely founded upon observation, experience, and the well-tried efficacy of remedies. There are physicians of both sexes who take considerable pains to acquire a correct knowledge of the properties and medical virtues of plants, roots, and barks, and the benefit of the patient. Isn't that remarkable to have that kind of observation made in 1773? Well, at the same time, the European medicine model and the one that was brought to America from Europe is based upon bloodletting and catharsis. And so, you know, we could kind of say that there's an advancement here if people will listen. Well, there was a debate that happened in 1789 about this. Benjamin Rush, who's the father of psychiatry, also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he provided the medicines for the Lewis and Clark expedition across the country. He stated, "We have no discoveries in the Natura Medica to hope for from the Indians in North America. It would be a reproach for our schools of physic if modern physicians were not more successful than Indians, even in the treatment of their own disease." This was a debate that happened at the University of Pennsylvania. The respondent was a botanist, Benjamin Smith Barton, And his comment was, the man who discovers one valuable medicine is more important benefactor to his species than Alexander, Caesar, or 100 other conquerors. All of the splendid discoveries of Newton are not so much real utility to the world as the discovery of the Peruvian bark. As you know, malaria and quinine was introduced by Peruvian Indians to European physicians. It's important, just 10 years after that debate in 1802, 170 plants used in Eastern native medicine were placed into the U.S. Pharmacopoeia as treatments for healthcare. Now, natural, herbal, natural, herbal, traditional, and folklore are all a part of the medicine process. And that's a Cherokee medicine shield that I've included here on the picture. I thought I'd real quickly give you some contributions of American Indian and Alaska Natives. The most important one, I guess, is the first one. Domesticated edible plants are, 60% of the present world's food supply comes from North and South America. Natural medicines discovered are aspirin, topical pain relievers, oral contraceptives, and they developed the syringe. They served as models of federated representative democracy to the American colonists. I think we need to teach that again now in this country. Conservation, raised bed agriculture, and irrigation are other things that were brought forward by Native people. Rubber, hammocks, moccasins, toboggans, kayaks, snow goggles, snowshoes, and mucklucks, all a part of Native people in the North. And then the words of barbecue, caribou, chipmunk, chocolate, cougar, hurricane, mahogany, moose, possum, skunk, potato, squash, and woodchuck are all from Native people. Now, the Colombian Exchange was a part of that, and it was an exchange both ways, don't get me wrong. There were lots of things that were brought forward. The wheel comes to mind. The horses were brought back. I don't know whether you knew this, but horses originally came from North America before they went to the rest of the world, and they were brought back by the Europeans. By the way, I'll quickly mention to you that the horse made it to the west coast of North America before the Europeans did. It was interesting that the Comanche and the Shoshone brought horses forward in the very early 1700s, and they were here already by the time that the Spanish and other settlers came into the West. Well, it's a 500-year story. In pre-1492, there were many, many tribes in North America and millions of people. They had unique religious and political and cultural beliefs. European countries sought to conquer the New World in order to gain wealth and military status and spread Christianity. They had relationships were often fraught with disease, misunderstandings, and conflict regarding land. Everything had to do with land, resources, and differing cultural beliefs. The Colombian Exchange resulted in tremendous social, cultural, and political change in both sides of the Atlantic. And as a native populations dwindled, Europeans turned to Africa as a new source of labor, giving rise to the early plantation system. I'll quickly mention to you that before 1720, the main slavery in this country was American Indian. We don't talk about that. That's not in the history books, but it's very, very true that that's the way it happened. It happened both in the North and the South in the 13 colonies. Okay, quickly, we'll go into demographics and we'll focus on California a little bit here. Today, there are 9.7 million people who identify as Native in the 2020 census. There are 574 tribes. 38 tribes are state recognized and in 16 states. And there are 250 tribes that are neither federal nor state. And about 150 of those are petitioning for federal recognition. It's interesting to me that the Chinook tribe, who welcomed Lewis and Clark to the Pacific Ocean, are not recognized as a tribe in this country. I wanted to show you where Indians live. This is a map of the census in 2010. 70% live off reservation. Now that's created an interesting change, and California is a big issue in this area. The population growth and resettlement means that in addition to the federal government, we must now work with states, counties, and cities to get our health care and our education needs met. So in California, there's a lot of discussion about urban health and how you can get these needs met, because they're not there for treaty anymore. If you move off the reservation, the treaty issues are dead. This is a listing of the states that have 100,000 or more Indians in them. There are 15 states that have more than 100,000 Indians, and the top 5 are shown here. California is number 1 with 807,000 Indians inside. Los Angeles is the biggest Indian city in the United States. San Francisco Bay has about 44,000 Indians who live in the area. I wanted to mention the Ramaytush Ohlone, and they're originally there on the San Francisco Peninsula. They're hunter-gatherer group originally. Their products and their tools are tule. That's how the grass that they make their houses out of: wood, clay, stone, and bone. They were hunter-gatherer, but they lived permanently in one spot and moved around to do the fishing. And they gathered roots, but they had some primitive farming process that they did as well. I wanted to mention, this is what happened? We'll get there. I wanted to mention Mission Dolores. I don't know if you knew this or not. Did you all know what Mission Dolores? It's the Creek of Sorrows. I haven't discovered why they named it the Creek of Sorrows, but it is interesting that 5,000 graves of Native people are around that mission. So the Mission District is a very special place for Native people, in my view. There's a little bit there. There's a painting that the Indians have done inside the mission that's being reestablished and protected. It'd be well worth your time to do a visit to Mission Dolores and find out a little bit more about what's there. The California Indian pre-contact tribes, there were 135 distinct language dialects there in 1542. I think that's about the time when the Spanish came into San Diego area. But up in your part of the country, 1769 is the best known for the settlement of San Francisco. This is a map of the Indian population of California. And the first part of it, the first dot down to 1845, is the Hispanic and Mexican controlled time periods where the population fell from 350 to 150,000. And then there was a very sharp reduction when the Americans took over and gold was discovered in California. It was genocide like no other. The population dwindled down to 16,000 in 1900. And as you can tell, it's increasing now on the other side up to 800,000. But the native people of California, the original natives, they live still in the north and in the east. That's their locations, and they have reservations and actually throughout California, rancherias. But if you took a look at the population, this is a 2010 breakout of the 10 most populous tribes in California. Most of them are from outside of California. There's one tribe, number 9 there, the Yaqui, are from California. The others have been imported in by various reasons. You know, the American Indian Relocation Act of the 50s had a great impact on where Indians were moved to, and many were moved to San Francisco, Los Angeles, all over the state. And so there's now, though, this influx of tribes coming into California for all kinds of reasons. I'll quickly mention there are 3 boarding schools that happen in California. There's one remaining. That's the Riverside Sheridan School. It's the only off-reservation boarding school left. I think that if you stay tuned and talk about what happened in Indian boarding schools, there's going to be some very negative reports about this coming up in the next 2 years. Well, let's talk about the health situation quickly. You know, what is the status? Health services are under-resourced. Access to health care is severely limited. There's insufficient money for chronic illness care, poor housing, persistent poverty, staff vacancies in the mental health care system, and all of this against a backdrop of increased prevalence of mental health issues. So let's quickly talk about morbidity and mortality. Alcohol and tuberculosis are still 6 times higher than the general population. Diabetes, accidents, poverty, depression, and suicide are 3 times higher than the general population. Violence is elevated, but we don't have any data to tell us how much. We know that in the Surgeon General's report, they have the same disorders as the general population, but a greater prevalence, a greater severity, much less access to treatment. Cultural relevance is much more challenging, and the social context is disintegrated. So why are these troubles here for Indian people? What's going on? Well, one of the first things, you know, the American Bar Association did a study on health equity amongst Indian tribes. And what they found out that there is no health equity. You can't obtain full health care potential in Indian communities. There are major health disparities due to historical, social, and economic disadvantage. There's forced relocation, projective negative stereotyping, and there's discrimination, racism, and exclusion throughout. This was done in 2017. If you look at the health concerns among Indian people, 21% of Indian people have a past year of mental illness. Native children and adolescents have the highest rates of lifetime depression of any group in the country. I'll quickly get through some material here. I can be much more detailed on this, but we want to cruise quickly. These are things you know. One thing, if you're in the healthcare field, I really want you to know this one. There's an interrelationship between substance use disorder, especially alcohol, and suicide. And serious thoughts about suicide are higher in those that use substances than making of a plan and the attempts of suicide. So if you work in the emergency room and you have somebody coming in, a native person who has been using alcohol, check for suicide. Speaking of suicide, this is a chart that shows, it explains something that I want you to know. Suicide in American Indian, Alaska Native communities is higher in the young people, not in the older people. You know, we have, if you just check the numbers, our suicide rate's about the same, maybe a little bit higher than the white population. But you ask where it is. White population is in the older population. Indian population, it's in the younger group. So we're losing our people at an early age. So quickly, I'll just tell you, we've got a 500-year history of interactions. We've got a geography. We don't know where we came from and how we got where we are and how we live where we live. Our identity, how do we define who we are? Because it's been placed upon us so often. Stereotypes about Indian people. Again, I mentioned the movies. Other things are just books and magazines are just as bad. There's power and control issues, economic influence, disparity, and increased morbidity and mortality. So what's wrong in this picture? How are we going to go forward? Well, one thing we need to do is to develop leadership in Indian country. This is my favorite photograph to talk about leadership, because we all have to work together. That boat doesn't move unless everybody's oar is in the water at the same time and then the same inflection in the direction on both sides of the boat. And so to get there, you need to have a caller who can actually make the rhythm and make things work in a much more improved way. When I did my first work with dealing with chronic illnesses, and it looked to me like it was a multifactorial event. I still think it is. The individual who has facing a chronic illness has all of these things surrounding them: negative boarding school, family disruption, substance abuse, racism, psych illness, education problems, impulsive, hopelessness, family history, suicide. All of these things are affecting the person. How do you help them get through this process? And the way that we began to work with this is we wanted to reduce the risk factors and enhance the protective factors. It's one of the best ways you can deal with chronic illness problems. You need to just total it out, make a list of things that need to be done. There will, it's easier to reinforce the positive factors, the protective factors, than it is to address the problem factors or the risk factors. And so you need to build that relationship in a slow, careful way, explaining to the patient what it is you're doing. Well, in the year 2000, I came across Michael Marmot's work in the Whitehall Studies and the Social Determinants of Health. And when I first read it, I saw this. Within a hierarchical society, there's a social gradient for morbidity and mortality. And I flat couldn't understand what that meant. And finally, after studying for many, many hours, I found that people with power, control, and security are healthier and they live longer. So that's a hierarchy. That's the ones that are doing it, the ones that have power and control and security. Well, natives have higher morbidity and mortality, and they need more than just routine health care. What they need is opportunity, empowerment, security, control, and dignity. If you're going to work in a native setting, you need to make sure that this exists for that person to get better. In my world, that's true of all patients. Inner city San Francisco needs this approach. My brother needed this approach. Well, the newer model for social determinants of health looks like this. And in the inner circle there, poor chronic health and risk of mental illness. If you have these problems surrounding you, unemployment or underemployment, poor access to health care, poverty, low income, poor housing, poor education, low food access and low food quality, social isolation, and adverse child experiences, you're going to have trouble. And it also is true that the national shortcoming in financial distribution causes problems. We all know in this country in the last 20 years, the rich people are getting richer and the poor people are getting poorer. And we need to worry about that. We need to argue that that needs to stop, because we're going to have a major problem in this country if we don't deal with the issues at hand. The bottom there says a longstanding historical and social cultural problem. Well, that's Indian issues in spades. So there you have the problems. What do you do about it? Well, in order to reduce morbidity and mortality, medical care must be integrated with housing, education, employment, social services, and legal authorities. No longer can the healthcare system, when you graduate from medical school and do your internship and you go get an office and you open the door and expect patients to come in, that's not the way to do it. You need to be out working with these other elements, forming a team of people that can work with patients in a much more systematic way. Gone is the day of the office. We need to be out working. This is an example of what I look at as a community social network. You look at it now, medical care, mental health care, and addictions and treatment and social services. We work with the individual and sometimes with peer and family, community, tribe, and society. That's the old model. We now have this other part: schools, churches, recreation, housing, justice, law, tribal council, administration, human resources, and public safety. When I work with a tribe to work with these issues, I form a task force with all of those people involved over on the far side, people that really want to help. And we work with the problem of suicide, but we look at housing, recreation, churches. All of these other people need to be players in helping to get that person better. Okay, strategies towards a broader understanding. I wanted to share with you, I did a little bit earlier, indigenous knowledge, traditional medicine and the value of traditional medicine. Local knowledge unique to a given culture or society. It has its own theory, its own philosophy, scientific and logical validity. It's used as a basis for decision-making for all of life's needs. All of you have this in the roots of your life. All of your patients have this in the roots of their life. And we need to understand that that's a part of who we are. And we need to appreciate the traditional knowledge that each of us has within ourselves. And we value that, and we will base our work on getting better on this theory. That lady who's reading to me, that's Rita Blumenstein. She just passed away last year. She is the best herbologist in Alaska. She's one of the wonderful grandmothers of the world. Those books she's reading to me, she started when she was 7 years old writing the books. She has 47 of those books, and she looks at those and reads material and asks me, what does that mean to you? She uses that as a part of her therapy and her way of working. It's a marvelous, marvelous way to appreciate that. Well, I'll quickly mention the model. On the left side, you've got best practices that are based upon science and community standard. Well, I'm recommending that it has to be also based on cultural values of the individual, their philosophies about life, their belief in causes about problems, local innovation, medicinal use of plants and minerals, healing procedures, oral transmission of knowledge, and community evaluation. So these things need to be added in as you're working with an individual or a community. We developed this model, and in number one, we sit and interview with the community or an individual. What's their theory about why this is a problem? What do they think the cause is? And what do they think it'll get better? If it does, do they have a way that they know would make it work better? What's the target population that needs help? And what type of intervention can we develop together that might help that person get better? And then we look at the theory of change, the strategy, we look at the outcomes in short, medium, and long term, and find out if we're moving the direction we need to with the patient in care. Well, I told you earlier in the lecture that I wanted to talk with you about what you could do to deal with rapprochement. And maybe these are things that you can think about in your own communities and your future in medicine. If you are working with a community that's different from you, you want to ask the community for consultation and assistance about what you are doing, and let them guide you and reality test the facts that you know and the things that you're trying to do. You want to recruit Native staff and students to come work with you and develop the mentorship that's needed for Indian care. Establish partnerships with Native organizations and schedule conferences with mutual interest. You might invite them to do a presentation in your conference so that you're sharing and talking and interacting in a more positive way. Reach out and engage the community. Leadership and mentorship programs are necessary in the community. Bring them in, let them be a part of what you're doing. An integrated advisory task force with review progress of problems and new directions. Those are the things I think that healthcare can establish in rapprochement with natives, with inner city communities, with anybody that's different from the people running the healthcare system. You know, we have not shared the same path to be where we are now. We need a real dialogue on race. It's conciliation time now, not reconciliation, conciliation. Let's get where we need to be and let's learn the history. So those are my words for all of you. I want to thank you very much. You've been very kind. This is my phone number contact. That's my cell phone. That's my email. You'll have this on the slides, but I welcome you all very much. And in a second, I'm going to switch over to, well, I'll do it right now. Questions and discussion. Thank you all very much. I see what's
Thank you,
happening.
everyone. Oh, sorry. I think we got to the right slide, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I move my mouse around and it changes the slides quickly.
Okay. All right. It looks good. Looks good that we're here. I'd just like to offer a closing to everyone. My name is Dixie Blumenshine. I'm an Oglala Lakota descendant, and I'm a second-year medical student at UCSF. And I'd like to start just by thanking all of the participants for joining us this evening and for your interest in learning about recent Native history and health. It's been an honor to learn and contribute to our patients and community's future together. And I'd like to invite you to please feel welcome to reach out to Dr. Walker using his contact information here with any questions. I'd also like to thank the Multicultural Heritage Center, the Native American Health Alliance, and the Association of Native American Medical Students for hosting this event. Most importantly, thank you to Dr. Walker for teaching us. We are extremely grateful and lucky to learn from your experience, your mentorship, your knowledge, and most of all, your love for Native peoples. I hope that everyone can leave this call in health and be well.
I'm going over to see the chat. I don't know if there's anything in there. There's thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I like that.
Yeah, all the praise, Dr. Walker. Hope you're able to receive that.
Well, indeed, I just want to tell you, if there's anything that I can do, if you guys are interested in career issues, ideas for extra training, anything like that, call me up. I work with people across the country, and I'd be happy to work with all of you. It's always good to have people so close to me, as I call San Francisco as close.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. We're lucky to have you.
All right. Did you all want to stay to ask questions, or are you okay if I end the meeting for folks?
Hey, Dr. Walker, I'll just be really quick. Thank you for this wonderful talk. Definitely learned a lot, even being in the space of so many new things were brought up today. We are in the process, a lot of us here at UCSF, working on a youth program for urban, Indigenous, and Native youth around the Bay Area. And I think it'd be great to connect with you as we move forward with this. I think you had a lot of, again, rich information that would be really wonderful to share with them, and then to hear your ideas as well would be really, really lovely. So I'll be sure to reach out.
Please do reach out. I'm delighted to hear what you're saying. You know, critical mass is always a problem in working on American Indian issues. There are so few of us that are physicians. There's really so few of us that are on faculty and work in education. It's a tragedy. And I think that, you know, I know that medical schools work hard to recruit Native students, but they don't work worth a toot recruiting Native faculty. And I think that my view is that we need to be kind of a cross-country faculty and be available anywhere. And I've done that my career, and I've always enjoyed it. And so anything I can do down there, please don't hesitate to email me or call me. You can, the best example, by the way, text me when you call and say, hey, I want to talk to you. Do you have time? And if I'm available, I'll pick it right up, or if not, I'll text you back and say, give me a couple of hours and I'll be back. But don't hesitate to indeed contact me. I'm now retired. That's why I don't have a staff other than me. So that's the best way to kind of get in contact with me.
Will do. Thank you.
You bet. Good luck to you.
I have a question. Hi, this is Tassi Bongiovanni. I totally agree with you about needing to support Native students, and as Kyle was talking about, needing to support students, Native, even middle school, high school, right, thinking way before medical school. But there aren't very many of us, and so how do you recommend sort of creating time and space for that with all the other things that we have to do in medicine and academic medicine?
You've asked the real question, I think. It's, you know, it's hard, and I hate saying it this way, but I'm going to say it. The first thing you want to do is take care of yourself and do your job and do very well in medical school. That's number one. The other is, if you can find time and even on weekends, if you can find things to connect with, or you want ideas about what to do, you know, do it. Pretty soon in medical school, you know, you'll start doing elective time. And you might want to do some elective time in a Native community. And so that's the opportunity to really blossom and grow and learn, because there's nothing like real world out there to kind of help you. They will love you, by the way. If you are interested enough to come and visit as a medical student, I've never seen that go badly. It's appreciated. And when I did this elective, I had the electives both at the University of Washington and here at Oregon, where students would go and spend time out on reservations or urban community. But I had them write reports. I wanted them to write reports for me. And I would collect those so that when other students came in, they would read the reports and they could either duplicate or do something different. And gradually you get quite a folder of material. And so you that's addressing the critical mass you're talking about, and finding the time. It really is important for us. We're rare. We're very, very rare, and it's hard to make connections, and it's hard to be heard. That's why I think the cross-national approach. Those of you who are Native, have you joined the ANAMS, the Association of Indian Physicians student group? That's another way to make connections. ANAMS has about 60 members, and it's medical students across the country. And that's another way for you to kind of learn and be online, and you can work around that way a little bit and learn what's going on, find out what's going on, what the rumors are from one place to the other, and of course the other. Ain't it awful? Everybody talks about how bad their place is compared to other places, but that's the real world, and we need to share that world and work with each other. And partner. I am very proud to be a member of the Indian Physicians Group. We have about 400 active members, and I know most of them. And anytime anybody calls me from that group, I'm there. I'm going to work and I'm going to help. And I think that's the way you need to take care of the critical mass problem. As medical students, you need to have good support and people to listen to. I'm sure that the university has people who are very skilled working on cultural phenomenology down there. I don't know about the Native staff or faculty, but I can guarantee you, if you call me, we'll talk. And indeed, it'd be important to kind of get an understanding of what's happening in your world. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I also meant from a faculty perspective. So once you're past medical school, because I'm faculty now, and so so it's as you were, I agree, and as you were saying, it's challenging because I so want to support all of our Native students, and actually there aren't that many, which is sad, but I'm one of the only Native faculty at our whole institution. I need it. Well, yeah.
Well, I can identify with that. I've been in that boat, and I suppose when I get in that boat, I start working with the Native community in Seattle and working with the Native community here in Portland, and they kind of get to know me and work with me a little bit, and so I have people I can talk to when I'm angry, because I feel like sometimes you just don't get heard, and it's amazing because the history we talked about today, Euro-Americans don't know that history, and they don't get it. They don't understand why we seem to be so angry and so desirous of making things better for Indian people. They want us to just come along, forget about those problems, and of course, to me and you, that's not in the past. It's in the present. We have to live with this every day, and so we can't forget about it. And I think that ask your question again. I want to know what I can do to be better helpful to you.
Oh gosh, that's so kind. I was curious what strategies you use to, as a faculty member, do a lot of these things and continue to support students, but also, like Carl was saying, think about how we're reaching into the community for students before they're in medical school. And also, I have a full-time job. So,
Well, you know, I came up from San Diego to work in University of Washington, and I knew I wanted to work with American Indian alcoholism issues. And I immediately went to the literature, and I started, okay, who's doing what in Indian work, and especially alcoholism, which I was interested in. There were 3 people in the country doing work on Indian alcoholism. 3. And so I called them all up and I got to know them. I still know them. I know one, the other 2 are gone now, but I got to know them and I learned from them how they were doing their research, and that helped me. It was not, I couldn't do it inside the University of Washington because nobody was doing that work. And what I did do, though, is we happen to have a very outstanding psychiatrist in cultural psychiatry. And we had a very outstanding psychiatrist in addictions. And I teamed with both of them. They were non-native. They were both Jewish. They didn't know beans about Indians. But I didn't care about that. I wanted their, oh, that's okay, I can. But you know, I think that when you get lonely, you need to find out who's working in the areas and reach out to them and let them know your background. And mostly they'll say, oh, we haven't talked to anybody like you before. And you know, work on your expertise area, but promote your Indian issues, and it will win. It will be very, very successful. I did that, and I feel very rewarded for the work that I did.
thank you. That's really helpful.
I see another hand up. I guess the hand went, was that you that I was just talking to? The hand went up? It's actually hard for me to see everybody.
I was just clapping to what you said.
Okay.
Not a hand up.
Well, the other thing I would invite you to do, let's do this again. I'm very available if you guys want to set up another discussion time and really talk about issues. I'll let you be the creator of the dialogue, and we can do some kind of discussion online like that. That works for me. I'd be happy to do that with you. But indeed, as you're developing your programs, you students, look for that lady who's a faculty member there. I don't know if she's in the same faculty area as you, but you want to know every Native faculty member there.
Is there any last questions, comments, thoughts before we close out? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Walker, for staying extra, and for everybody else for staying, a little bit beyond time. It was a very fruitful conversation and dialogue to listen into. And we'll definitely partner to hopefully bring you back. I think we all work with each other in some capacity already. So thank you so much.
Well, you've got a good group down there, and I think it is important to develop the cultural components of the programs down there. I don't know who's doing that in psychiatry. They had when I told you Francis Liu was there, and they were excellent. But I'll do some exploration, and anything I can do, Melissa, you don't hesitate to give me a call.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.